Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our session today, Cultivating Learning, Exploring Identity Through Playful Art Making. Today we'll explore how contemporary art can help young learners understand their own identities, and our presenters will model teaching strategies for close looking, conversation, storytelling, and playful art making. And they'll introduce a series of free online education resources called We Speak the Art of Becoming. So let me introduce our presenters today. We have Tiffany McGettigan and Nicole Vance, who are educators at the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden. And I'm Philippa Rappaport, and I'm an educator at the Office of Educational Technology, which is the office behind the Learning Lab. So today's session is one in a series that we do that we call Cultivating Learning, and it's a monthly offering in which featured educators model learning techniques, teaching techniques for using digital museum resources for a variety of learning environments. I'll turn it over to our guests in just a minute. I just want to go through a little bit of housekeeping. But what you can see here is our upcoming schedule. So we have today's session, and then we have through April and May, we have getting started and creating collections. And those two parts form sort of one of a whole, which is really designed to help you understand the Learning Lab, how basically to discover, create, and share using the Learning Lab. If you want to rewatch today's session or you can't make something, you can always find all of these sessions on the help page, learninglab.si.edu/help. And that's where you can find the archives, and you can also watch from the link you're looking at today. So if you're here, you probably already know the Learning Lab is an interactive platform where you can discover millions of resources from across the Smithsonian. You can create learning content with those resources, and then you can share them. You can find everything you need to know at the help page, and I'll put that link in the chat in just a minute. That's where you can find step-by-step instructions, how to use the lab, and then also all these archived sessions that I'm mentioning. So today's session is really meant to be interactive. So if you're joining us today by YouTube, please use the chat function over on the far right of your screen. And if you're joining us through Facebook, you can use the comment section down in the bottom center of your screen. So to get us started today, we're going to ask a question of you, and that is, how can art making guide young learners to better understand their own identities? And so please put your comments in the chat, and I'm going to turn it over to Nicole.
All right, well, thanks, Philippa. And again, I'd really love your thoughts on this opening question of how can art making guide young learners to better understand their own identities? Perhaps you are an art teacher, or maybe a teacher who's looking to incorporate more art into your classroom. But I'd be curious to hear from you in terms of how we can help learners understand their own identities through playful art making.
And sometimes it takes a couple of minutes before comments come in.
I know it's a big question.
I see we lost Tiffany momentarily there.
Well, as you're thinking, I'll offer an insight that I had recently. I really love how art can tell a story. I think it's a very powerful tool for teaching storytelling, especially with young learners. So young learners, while making art and even learning about art, they can tell stories, whether that be kind of their own personal experiences or those from their community and their friends or family. All right. And I see in the chat from Alexis, it can be a tool for kind of the exploration of the self. And that's a process that Alexis tries to incorporate in their own work, and allows it to be more impactful. I couldn't agree more. All right, these are some great comments. Please feel free to keep them coming in the chat. But I'd like for us to kind of jump in to our workshop today. It's going to have two parts. First, we're going to do some close looking at an artwork by Senga Nengudi, and then go through an art making project that corresponds to her work. So I think we can just jump right into our artwork now. So in the next few moments on your screen, you should be seeing Senga Nengudi's artwork. Here we go, titled RSVP X. And I'd like for you to just take a few moments to let your eyes cross over this artwork, starting on the left, working your way down to the center, going perhaps down and then back up again. And I'd like for you to imagine yourself kind of touching this sculpture. My first question for you is, how do you think this artwork would feel? Perhaps would it feel rough? Would it feel smooth? What might the texture be? Okay, from the Rockwell Museum, I see, yeah, smooth. Has to feel smooth. Excellent. Oh, or kind of like there's tension or kind of stretch. Some of you are wondering what medium or material the artist has used. Is it hard? Is it metal? Would it perhaps feel smooth and cold? These are some great kind of questions and observations. Now, I'd imagine you to touch it. Would it move as you touch it? And if so, how would it move?
We have some comments, Nicole, that maybe it's stretchy instead. So there's already some questions about how it feels and that relate to how it might move.
Yeah, this sense of stretchiness or kind of this elastic kind of quality of the work. Or even perhaps like a guitar string. Yeah, as it's pulled, it kind of returns back to its shape. Great observations. Again, today we're thinking about art in a playful way. So this question is geared more so towards young learners, but I'd invite you to I try it out as well. And if you were to move through this sculpture, how would you move? Would you kind of gracefully step over it? Would you crawl? How would you move? On Alexandra, yeah, kind of the smooth and taut sculpture. Those are great words to describe kind of the texture, or the imagined texture.
It makes me sort of want to dance the way those lines are.
Absolutely. Yeah, love that kind of dancing through the sculpture. Ooh, yeah, or crawling under it upside down, going under it. For some participants, it reminds them of, a limbo bar where you might slide underneath on that gray floor that we see. All right. Well, thanks for stretching your imagination with this work in terms of how you would move through it. I'm supposed to be kind of leaning under kind of the outer pieces too. So yeah, there's definitely kind of a sense of movement, whether it's sliding or crawling or dancing through it. So like I mentioned earlier, this piece is by American artist Senga Nengudi. It's titled RSVPX, which basically stands for, please respond. And Senga Nengudi, while this sculpture is seen kind of here in this static moment, it's meant to be kind of a site for performance. So before we talk about kind of the mediums that the artist used here and kind of the meaning of the work, I'd like to invite you to watch a performance of this work. It's important to note that the performer in this piece is not the artist, Senga Nengudi. It's her close friend and collaborator, Marin Hassinger. So let's go there. And as it's playing, you'll notice there might be some white noise. And that is the music or the sounds that accompany the performance. There's kind of shakers and a cello that you might hear. All right, so we'll just watch about a minute of this. And as we watch it, I want you to think about, did this sculpture move the way you imagined or not? All right, I wish we had time to watch the entire performance. I just wanted to give you a quick taste of the performance. And I'd like to kind of revisit kind of the initial question. Did the artwork move the way that you expected it to? And why or why not? Earlier, some of you mentioned that, maybe it looks like metal, might be hard. So when we saw the performance, definitely looked a little bit different. Okay. So maybe a lot softer, more graceful than you expected. Or yeah, kind of more anticipated. Oh yeah. Thinking about it coming off of the wall. In this static image that we see here, we don't even think about, taking the artwork off the wall. Definitely. Okay. So again, this work by Senga Nengudi, titled RSVP 10, is created out of nylon stockings. Senga Nengudi, as she was pregnant with her children, she was really inspired by kind of the strength and resilience of her skin. And as it kind of stretched in and out, and she really wanted to kind of recreate this strength and resilience through her art. So she looked to her closet and discovered nylon stockings had that same strength and resilience. So this work is made from several pairs of nylon stockings, and she's filled them with sand and rose petals to kind of give it that weight. So again, kind of this body-like or body-inspired sculpture, inviting kind of the audience to kind of respond to her work. So I'd just like to pose one more question about this work, and I want to ask you, what is your response to this artwork? It could be, how does it make you feel? Or maybe what questions do you have that maybe are unanswered? With Senga Nengudi's soft sculpture and performance, there really is kind of this sense of her wanting to connect with the audience, make them feel and make them respond to the work.
We have a
Ah,
question about rose petals, Nicole.
yeah. Okay, so why rose petals? So Senga Nengudi wanted to use kind of natural materials in her work, such as sand, rose petals, sometimes even leaves to kind of fill them, kind of these natural substances that are contained within kind of these nylon stockings. Senga Nengudi is also thinking about where women wear nylon stockings to interviews. She's working a lot in the 60s and 70s. So job interviews and dance recitals, places where women we need to perform. Oh, all right. These are some great comments. Yeah, reminding kind of teaching being stretched in many directions. I definitely agree, especially after these last few years. And yeah, reflecting on our own bodies and how are they resilient. I love how that kind of connects to kind of teaching as well, kind of the resilience of teachers over these last few years. Okay, so again, this workshop is kind of two parts: a modeling of a close look of Senga Nengudi's work, and then diving into art making. So I just want to show you what we'll be working out of today. We're going to be in the Smithsonian Learning Lab in this collection I've titled Dancing Soft Sculptures. So this is part of a series of kid projects aimed to kids under 12 for the classroom and for at home. So you'll see I have the artwork resource here, as well as some of the discussion questions that we use today, as well as a link to the performance and questions. There's also opportunities for students to experiment with materials that might be familiar to them, introduce key words, and then meet the artist, which we'll do in a moment, and make it to the kids project. So we're going to jump into this project. I'd invite you, if you haven't yet, to gather some materials. At the start, I'd ask you to grab something that stretches, something like a sock or a balloon. Old nylon stockings, if you have them, are perfect. So if you want to grab those, we'll give you a few moments to grab something that stretches and something that fills. Now, after doing that, I'm going to start sharing my table so you can see some of the supplies that I gathered today. So again, something to fill with. Right here I have some quinoa, rice, beans, pasta, Legos, anything that has a lot of tiny parts will work well for today. Something that stretches, you'll need that. Some tape if you'd like to hang your soft sculpture up today. A pen and paper might be helpful, or pencil and paper to help sketch out some of your ideas. And then just for kind of the ease of pouring, I'd suggest either kind of a measuring spoon or a glass, as well as a cup. So I'd invite you to grab those things if you have them nearby. Really, anything works for this project if it stretches, contains, and then something that fills. Okay, so the steps for this activity are all in the Learning Lab. If you hit this info icon, it'll have kind of certain information and kind of notes for if you're a classroom teacher or a caregiver, how to best create with your students or young learners. Okay, so once you've gathered your materials, I hope you have. I'd love to hear what you have in the chat. So if you're willing to write some of those materials that you have with you, love to hear. But as we'll still keep moving on. So after you've gathered the materials, you'll next need to fill your soft sculpture. So for this, a glass is really helpful. If you're working with students in the classroom or at home, even kind of a shoebox will be helpful to kind of contain the mess. This is a messier project. But if you have a sock or nylon stocking, something that stretches around, you can then pour or fill your sculpture into your something that stretches. And if you're working with old nylon stockings, make sure to kind of tie off if you have any holes in the toes. That's usually where I usually get toes in mine. All right, so we'll work on filling these. I'm gonna fill a couple. So we have something to work with, or quite a bit to work with. And I might even just pour this in. Okay. And again, if you're making with us today, love to hear what mediums or things that you chose today. You can put those in the chat. All right, so I have two soft sculptures here. Now, using the kind of that cup to help me fill. Okay, now it's time to move on to the next step. So after we've filled our soft sculpture, now it's time to twist and tie. And this is where this playful aspect comes in. At the Hirshhorn, we love to experiment, and I really kind of emphasize play in art making. So as you are creating your soft sculptures, I invite you to kind of think about where you might knot these. I'd recommend doing one knot up at the top so your filler doesn't come out. But you can kind of stretch and separate some of that filler and knot. Senga Nengudi, she's filling with sand and rose petals and other natural materials. Stretches and knots. I might even separate this into 3. You can even twist yours together if you have them. And again, some materials work better than others for twisting and tying. If you're using socks, you might be able to just maybe twist once or not once. I'm going to just separate this one into 2 segments. Okay. All right, so there's our kind of our experimenting with playful twisting and tying. You can think about, you know, how you like them best. The great thing about this step is you can always unknot these and try again. Okay, so after kind of the step of twisting and tying your soft sculptures, now comes the next step of sketching out your space. So if you're working with young learners, this is a helpful step for them to think about, you know, where their sculpture is going to hang from. And this, it doesn't have to be anywhere complicated. It could be as simple as under a chair. So that's what I'm going to have mine be today. I'm going to do a chair. And think about these 2 soft sculptures and how they might hang. So I might have one hang from this side down to the ground. And then my one that has 3 segments, just down from the bottom of the chair. That one might not even hit the floor. And again, if you're using the Learning Lab, We have some tips or kind of questions that you might ask your young learners about where you might hang them between two chairs or a door frame to kind of get your mind working and get your young learners kind of inspired. Okay. So after you've stretched and you've filled and sketched your space, now is time to kind of hang it up or hang it out. I'm not going to model this today. Hanging from my web camera might be a little too much weight. But this is, again, kind of a fun and kind of an experimental step. You might find that, it doesn't hang that well from the bottom of a chair, or you might need more tape to secure it. But you can find what works best. And you might have to revisit kind of this sketching step and create a sketch that works best. And any tape works for this, so just be careful of what surfaces you're taping to. So if you use painter's tape or masking tape, just make sure that you don't want to take off any paint or surfaces as you detach your soft sculpture. Okay. Jumping to the next step is to make it move. And again, this is very playful step. Kind of thinking about performance and incorporating that into the soft sculpture. And again, on the Learning Lab, we have questions about, will you be the one to perform or to move inside of your sculpture? Or will you ask a friend, just like Senga Nengudi did with RSVP 10? And what music would you like to have you kind of accompany the movement? So again, this is a very playful and also a collaborative step. So if you're using this in the classroom or at home with multiple young learners, it's a great opportunity to kind of perform, act out their art. Okay. So then after you make it move, the next step is to title your performance. And again, there are questions on the Learning Lab of, how would you title it? You can think about the mood or the feeling. How do you think those would respond to your soft sculpture? Maybe how might that title your work? Okay, so I know that was a lot of information thrown at you. And again, if you did follow along with art making, I'd love to hear kind of what materials or mediums you used. So in the chat, please feel free to write those in. And if you didn't make with us, I'd invite you to kind of think about what mediums would you use with young learners. And I'll stop sharing my art table. Here we go.
So Nicole, I think this is a great one for that, those old socks, that sock drawer with all the mismatched socks. And you're right, when I'm stretching out the sock, it's not only is it shorter than nylons, but it doesn't make as many knots, right? So we have to kind of adapt depending on the materials that we use.
Mm-hmm.
I also can imagine in a classroom setting that maybe using like a cardboard box or a shoe box could be a great way to sort of contain the project, especially for younger children. And there's some comments here. Let's see, Dr. Shoppert used black socks, rubber bands, and craft beads as a filler.
Oh, wonderful. And I see lentils in a sock from Justine. Yeah, kind of using what is available kind of around the house. Definitely. I've heard teachers kind of use balloons as well. And again, kind of having to adapt on what is being put in as the filler and maybe how many times it can be knotted or twisted. But definitely a material if you're on a budget that is also kind of elastic and resilient. All right. And again, if you have any ideas, feel free to put them in the chat. I'd like us to kind of jump into the Learning Lab collection again. I just want to show you some of the resources that are further available for learning about Senga Nengudi. So let me start sharing my screen so you can see those.
And while you're waiting, Nicole, we have a great comment from Alexis. She's an art education student and could see this being incorporated as a way to immerse students into the work, and maybe using small noisemakers like bells could really be a great adaptation to this project. It's a great idea.
Oh, yes, I love that. And yeah, thinking about movement and sound and how they're related. Definitely a lot of ways to integrate this lesson into kind of other disciplines, thinking about art or even science and gravity. So again, kind of back to this Learning Lab collection, these are the steps that we went through. There's also kind of a tile that kind of invites you to explore more ways to make. So it has different kind of materials. Produce nets also work well. They stretch and contain as well. But what I want to show you now is this Meet the Artist, or kind of About the Artist. So if you were to click on this resource, it would take you to this Learning Lab collection titled Get to Know Senga Nengudi. So this is a one collection within the About the Artist series, which presents contemporary artists and their biographies in a kid-friendly way. So again, this has some of the elements of the Kids Project in terms of the artworks and performances, but then also has details about her biography, thinking about her childhood, you know, how did she become an artist? And then also using resources from across the Smithsonian. There's some really great photographs of Senga Nengudi when she studied abroad in Japan, as well as some of photographs from her in her studio in Harlem. And again, I'm drawing through all of these wonderful resources from the Smithsonian, and the link to the Make It project. So this is a great resource to use with your young learners to kind of introduce them to artists and kind of think about their identity. Each of these essential questions has kind of questions for students to reflect back on and think about, you know, their own identities and how they are similar to or different from the artist. All right. Again, a lot of information thrown out at you. But I have one more that I quickly would like to kind of pass along, and that is the Hirshhorn Kids Learning Lab page. So this page is kind of a one-stop place for your Meet the Artist or About the Artist series, as well as We Speak the Art of Becoming. We'll put a link to this in the chat so you can access it. The opportunities for students to learn about these contemporary artists and create artworks inspired by them. And here in the bottom of this page is the We Speak Art of Becoming. So this is a series that features the work of women artists and artists of color, and looks at their work and their biography, presenting in a kid-friendly way. So there's many artists here. I guess six artists now, and more to join soon. So you'll see Senga Nengudi, who we talked about earlier, Munir Shurudi Farmian, an Iranian artist, Janine Antoni, who uses her body as a tool to make art, Huma Baba, who makes sculptures of large aliens and visitors from other worlds, Lois Maylou Jones, and focusing on some of her lesser known work in collage. And then Jenny C. Jones, a sound and visual artist. So these resources are here for you to use and to kind of inspire your young learners in playful art making. So again, a lot of information at you all at once. And I'll put this link in the chat so you have it.
Thank you so much for this presentation. It makes me just want to have a young child nearby to do all this, these activities. So this is the time that we open it up for your questions, comments, observations. So please feel free to put your thoughts, your questions in the chat. We have something from the Rockwell Museum. I like how you connected the materials the artist used into the project. Great sensory experience in addition to creating art.
Yeah, this is one fun project where you can even think about how it might smell if you're working with foods as well. Definitely.
So any questions, any comments? Are there other ways you might do this project? Can you recommend some other materials that people might want to use? Or
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of these we've kind of discussed earlier, such as socks. There were a few participants had mentioned that earlier. Balloons work really well. Produce nets as well, even grocery shopping bags. You can get even really creative and use old t-shirts, long sleeve shirts, really anything that kind of stretches and contains. Oh, this question, Kara, if the Learning Lab is directed only for children and young people, well, that's the audience to which many of these resources are written to. They're really for all learners. They're a great resource in understanding the artist's biography in a very kind of simple, kind of kid-friendly way.
so when we were planning this session, you talked about working with teachers from a variety of content areas. Could you maybe talk about that a little bit? How you might incorporate other disciplines into this project?
Yeah, of course. So the We Speak Art of Becoming project is in partnership with DC Public Schools. So I've had the opportunity to work closely with teachers there through workshops, and many teachers were kind of connecting this project to not only kind of the disciplines of science and gravity, but also thinking about collaborating with music teachers at their school, having students who are in music classes creating kind of the sounds or music to go alongside a performance. So kind of collaborating on that front.
I'd also add, Nicole, that I think with all the Meet the Artist or Get to Know the Artist kid-friendly biographies we have, that there's a really great opportunity for the English language arts classroom and reading and writing of biographies, learning about history through these artists. So really lots of multidisciplinary ways to utilize this work in these collections.
I could imagine it would also work well with several people doing it as a group project.
Definitely. And each of the Learning Lab descriptions for the collections has kind of curriculum links as well as standards as well. So if you're a classroom teacher, I hope that'll be helpful for you as your lesson planning.
Fantastic. Do we have any other questions from the audience or comments?
Just some confirmation that this is a great group project idea. Thank you, Justine.
Okay. Do you have anything else you want to share? No?
I think that's it. Yeah, there's links in the chat for further discovery of contemporary artists to use with young learners.
Thank you so much to both of you. And we will add the link to the Learning Lab collection into the description of the YouTube video for this session, so people can always find it. So I'd like to thank you both so much for this. Check out all the amazing content from the Hirshhorn. There's so much there. And we will see you. I'll just put the schedule up again. Our next session is getting started on Thursday, April 14th, and then creating collections on the 25th. So thank you everyone so much for coming, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.